All right, I'm going to go over how to build the test bed that we're going to use for the next few weeks in robotics class. So the first thing you're going to need is this piece right here. You see it's got the little holes on one side of it, the longer slots on the other. It's at a right angle. Okay, this is the piece you need to get from Mr. Reese. So we're going to attach a bushing to it. Could not think of the word. Bushing to this piece, and we want to put it on the side with the holes here. And we want to put it on the inside of the piece, like this. Don't put it on this side. Okay, that's going to mess stuff up. It's got to be on this part. All right, you'll use a green screw here. And then a nut on the back side to hold it in position. And you just need the one green screw for right now, just one. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing on the other end. Now it doesn't have to be the exact same position. You can see I've got 4 empty holes and then I put my bushing. It doesn't matter if you're the exact same. You just don't want them right next to each other because you got these 2 wheels that we're going to attach to them. We don't want the wheels to bump. We want the wheels to spin separate. So we just got to make sure there's some empty space here in the middle. Okay, I'm going to pick another bushing and put it in the same position on the other end. Again, with just one green screw in the outside hole of the bushing. Now I'm going to use my hex driver to tighten those up. All right, there you go. Okay, next we're going to put the motor on. Now this part's a little tricky. You can see there's 2 holes for screws and a hole for the axle. The axle needs to go through the middle hole of the bushing. This hole of the bushing is for this hole of the screw, and then this hole of the screw is going to go here beside the bushing. And the axle is going to go in there. And then this screw doesn't go into the motor. So it goes like this. I can't really hold everything together because it won't stay together until I use screws and collars. So I'm going to take a green screw and I'm going to put it in the other end. And again, that's going to go into this screw hole. Like that. Okay, now I'm going to use a blue screw in this hole into that post. Gonna need to use my hex driver to help me because I can't get my fingers in that space. Go ahead and tighten up both screws. All right. So you can see we've got the bushing here. This green screw on the end of the bushing goes into the middle post of the motor. This blue screw that's not in the bushing at all goes into the end post. And then the axle can go, my motor's a little bit crooked, get that straightened out. The axle can go through the middle hole and into the axle hole of the motor like that. Okay, now in order to hold the axle, we need to use a collar. Okay, this part's kind of tricky. I'm going to put the the collar right there over the hole, and then I'm going to use the axle to get it lined up just right. It'll go through the collar and into the motor. Alright, now you want to make sure that this collar is right against this metal piece, not raised up. Can't really do it. You don't want it raised up like that. Okay, you want it right down against the metal piece. And I'm going to use the skinny hex driver to tighten the screw. They call that a set screw. Now when I tighten that, I want to make sure the screw is lined up with a flat face of my axle. You don't want it on a corner because then it'll never get quite tight. So I'll make sure that my screw is lined up with a flat face of the axle, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten that. And if you have your collar right against the metal, now your axle won't come out and it's going to stay in the motor. Very important to get this tightened up, because if that is not tightened correctly, the axle will fall out of your motor and it's going to cause you all kinds of issues. So make sure you get that tightened up. Okay, it's also important that the bushing here is on one side of the metal and the motor is on the other side of the metal. Okay, if we put the bushing and the motor on the same side and I try to put the motor through here like this, like that, okay, if I was going to do that, then I would have to use a green screw here and then see this gap right here? Okay, when this motor turns, it's going to pull against that screw and it can break this little post off right there because there's nothing supporting it. So we don't ever want the motor touching the bushing. Alright, the motor goes on one side of the metal, the bushing goes on the other side of the metal. You'll want to remember that when you're doing your problem solving activities. It's a common mistake and we don't want to break these motors. Alright, so make sure that you have the bushing, the metal, then the motor goes like this on the other side of the metal. Okay, so we're going to put this in the same way. We're going to use a green screw in the end here. And it's going to go into this middle hole of my motor. Get that tightened up. Alright, so you can see green screw into that post. This post is going to get the blue screw, the hole here, lined up with the empty hole of my bushing. So, take a blue screw and put it in there. Difficult for me to get that so you can see it. So I'm going to have to start putting it in a little bit. So now you can see where that blue screw is going. Okay, I'm going to tighten it up with my hex driver. Alright, now I need to put the other axle in here. So you can see the axle hole is lined up with the blank hole from the bushing so that my axle can go into my motor. But I need to use a collar in there. So this is the trickiest part of the whole build, I think. This is the best way I've found to do it. I put my collar in here and I make sure that I make sure not to drop it first. Want to make sure that the set screw is facing me so that I can get to it easily. Now I'm going to take the axle, put it up through the hole, see it come through the collar, into the motor. There's a smaller hole inside the motor. There's like a big hole, and then there's a small hole, and when you feel it snap in there, like that, then you know you've got it in position. Okay, so I'm going to tighten this set screw on one of the flat faces of the axle. I can't do it that way, I've got to turn it. Okay, again, you want to make sure that the collar is against the metal, and now my axle won't come out. And you can see the axle is in the motor. Alright, now what we need to do is take this and put it on the build plate. In order to do that, we're going to use threaded beams. Now these are tall threaded beams that you do not have in your build kit. You'll need to ask Mr. Reese for these tall ones. Alright, so I'm going to use a red screw here. Now where you put it, it's really not that important. I don't like to use the outside set of holes because it's hard for me to get my hand in there, so I'm just going to use the inside set of holes, and I'm just going to pick a spot. I'm going to go like the 5th hole here. So you can see where I've got the screw. Put the threaded beam on there. Fifth hole over, 2 rows up. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Fifth hole, 2nd row. Okay, these screws might be the most important screws in the entire project because they will come loose. This piece is pretty heavy with these 2 motors on it, and it's going to be a little wobbly. So you need to make sure that you get these 2 screws nice and tight. So I'm going to tighten them up with my hex driver. There we have it. Alright, now this is going to go on here. And we want it to go this way so that the motor is on over the build plate and the axle will go over the edge where there's no build plate. So that way the wheel doesn't hit the build plate. Alright, I'm going to use red screws again. Well, looking at this, my green screw here is going to be in the way of this. So I'm I'm actually going to slide this over a couple. Sorry for that, but I'm not redoing the entire video for that one fix. Alright, so I went ahead and slid these over to the 3rd hole instead of the 5th hole. And now, they're not in the way. These green screws aren't in the way. So I'm going to take a red screw and put it into the threaded beam. This part's going to be kind of tricky. You might need to ask a friend to hold this for you, because I'm already having difficulty myself, and I've done this quite a bit. So I would definitely recommend you hold it for your friend, ask your friend to hold yours while you screw it in. It'll work perfect. Alright, got that one tightened. Now we're going to use another red screw over here. Now you can't really see. There. Okay, red screw into the threaded beam, holds this in position. You can see the motors are on the side of the build plate, and the axles actually extend out from the build plate. Okay, next thing we're going to do is put a wheel on the axle. Now, if you just put the wheel right on there right now, the spokes, which are these little plastic pieces on the inside of the wheel, can get caught up on this metal piece and make it so that it won't spin correctly. So what I would suggest is, there's a couple ways you could do this. The way I'm going to do it is 2 long spacers. You could use a collar instead if you want, but I'm going to use 2 long spacers. So I'm going to put both long spacers on the same axle. Then the wheel. Then the collar. It looks like there's just enough space for the collar to fit. Use my hex driver. Alright, let's see if I can get the camera to see this. So you can see we've got 2 spacers, wheel, collar. The collar's tight, it's not falling off, the wheel's not coming off, and the wheel isn't going to hit the metal piece. See how it's got these treads that stick out? We don't want them to hit this metal piece. That's why we've got the 2 spacers. I'm going to need to grab 2 more spacers. So that we can do the other side. Alright, exact same deal here. I'm going to take 2 long spacers, put them on the axle. Okay, then the wheel. Then the collar. Then tighten it up. Alright. Now when you spin this, you'll hear a little whining coming from the motor. That's because there's gears in there that you're forcing to move, but they're not supposed to move from you moving it. So don't sit here and spin the wheel back and forth listening to that motor whine. For some reason, kids like to do that. Don't do that. That is not good for the motor. We don't want to ruin our motors. They're very expensive. So don't spin this and just play around with it. That's not what it's for. Alright. My screws on top feel like they might not be tight enough. Okay. just tighten them up real quick. So you can see here, that's where we're at. Now we need to attach the sensors. So the first sensor that I'm going to use is called the bumper switch. I know it's backwards to you, but that can just needs to go somewhere on the build plate. You don't want it to be right underneath the motor or underneath the wheel, so just somewhere in this area. So I'm just going to put it kind of in near the corner. And for all the sensors, you want to use green screws. Those are long enough to get to the other side so that you can put a nut on there and get it nice and tight. Okay, so I put my bump switch over here in the corner, and I made sure the cord is towards the middle because this brain right here is going to go in the middle, and everything needs to plug into it. So I always want my wires to go towards the middle, and if I put it over here, I want it to go towards the middle so that they can plug into the brain easily. Alright, next I'm going to put on the, it's called a line tracker. I usually call it the light sensor. So that's going to go on here. Now you really want to make sure that this window right here is not underneath the motors because that will mess up the light readings later on. So I'm going to put it over here in this corner and just use a green screw to hold it in position. You don't need to get these screws super tight, but you do want to keep you need to put a nut on the bottom and get it somewhat tight so that they aren't falling off. Trying to decide how I want this positioned. Alright, I'm going to go with this way. So I just put it over here in this corner. Okay, next we're going to go limit switch. I'm just going to put the limit switch on the side with the line tracker. No real reason other than I just don't want it on the same side as the bump switch. That way it's, well, actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do for the limit switch. I'm going to move it over a little bit more so that this metal piece is overhanging the edge like this over the edge, and that'll be easier to push than if it's like this. Metal plate kind of gets in the way. I don't like that. Doesn't really matter to me, but I think this is easiest. So you can use 1 or 2 screws on this. Again, it doesn't have to be super tight. So I'm just putting 2 screws on there because it'll help keep it from moving around quite so much when I'm pushing it. Not really picky about how many screws you use on yours. Okay, so you can see I made it hang over the edge so I can push the switch easy. And the last one is going to be this one. It's the, if you look real careful, you can see it says optical sensor on it. I usually call it the color sensor. Alright, we want this hole facing towards the middle because this cord's going to have to go into it and then plug into the brain, which is in the way right now. Alright, so I'm just going to put that over here on this edge. Not really picky about where it goes. I'm just going to put it near the edge. Actually, I take that back. Somewhat picky, because again, you don't want it directly underneath the motor, because that can mess with the readings. So actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is move it a little bit over here so that it's not anywhere near that motor, and it won't have problems with shadows and mess up my color readings. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put the nuts on there. So there's where I put mine. And again, the hole, can't really see it. I can't get the camera in there, but the hole is on this side, not this side. So the cord can go easily into the brain. Alright, so I'm just going to take my hex driver and make sure all these screws are somewhat tight. They don't need to be super tight. You don't want them too tight because all the sensors are made out of plastic and we don't want to break the plastic trying to get them super tight. These pieces aren't going to move, so that's why the screws don't need to be really, really tight. Alright, now you're going to need one of these cords. It's got the old style phone connectors on the end. Okay, this little clip part needs to be on the bottom, like this, when you put it into the sensor. So notice I keep the clip on the bottom, and you'll hear it snap in. And now it's in there pretty good. If I can get my hand out of the way. Okay, I'm not going to pull really hard, but it's not falling out. Okay, final thing we need to add on is the LED light. Use whatever color you want. I think the red is the easiest one to see, but I don't have enough red for everybody. But since I'm old, I need something easy to see, so I'm going to go with red. Alright, you're going to need an extension cord. The extension cord has 3 metal prongs. That's what I'm trying to think of. 3 metal prongs sticking out, 3 holes. The LED only has 2 prongs. Alright, so we've got to get this lined up just right in the extension cord in order for it to work. So first off, see the gold face here? No gold face on that side. No gold face on that side. So I call that the solid side, the gold side. We want the gold side, the gold faces, to be on the same side. Okay, these two are going to go in, if you hold it this way, they're going to go in the top 2 holes. If I put it this way, see how it's uneven? Goes here and it drops way down. We don't want that. We want it to go like this so that it's pretty much straight across. It's not perfect, but it's much better than the other way. Alright? This is the only way it'll work, so you got to make sure you put it in there right. Alright, now I'm just going to attach it to my test bed. There's no way to screw it in here. So what I've found the easiest way to do this is to I just tie a kind of a loose knot around one of the posts. You don't need to pull it super tight, but you do need to pull it tight enough so that hopefully it won't fall off. So just tie a little knot right there around the posts. And again, all of my plugs, see the plug here, the plug here, all my plugs go towards the middle so that I can put my brain right there. I'll go over how to connect the brain in another video.